is there such thing as dark romance that is too dark? Who decides what is allowed to be written about, specifically in the dark romance genre? And how do we decide when to warn readers about it? What warrants a trigger warning and what doesn't? Should there be trigger warnings at all?
Story Stack.
It's like book club,
but it's more than books, and it's not quite a club. Welcome back to Story Stack. I'm Ansley.
I'm Gabriel.
And I'm Lily.
And today's episode is about the Mindfuck series by S.T. Abbey.
This series is a popular self-published dark romantic thriller. That's how kind of the world describes it. That's how I think is pretty fitting for it. The first book alone on Goodreads has 4.25 stars, which is crazy, and with nearly 400,000 ratings. So this isn't just a bunch of niche people spamming 5 stars. This is 400,000 people and over 200 million reads. This isn't Goodreads statistics. This is just overall. The first 3 books in the series offer the warning, I know this shit is fucked up, so don't bother writing to tell me I'm twisted in the head. Wink. The last 2 books, at least on Kindle editions, offer no warning at all. Reading this book, seeing that sort of introduction to it, it's so different than what you get from dark romance, which is usually a list of trigger warnings. But of course, I knew this was a dark romantic thriller. I read the description of the books. I knew exactly what I was getting into. And when I promoted it to Ansley and had Ansley read it, she also knew what she was getting into. The premise is interesting, but Gabriel is not a reader of romance. He read his first romance book actually for this podcast.
I actually liked The Love Hypothesis quite a bit.
And now we've pushed him even further into the subgenre of dark romance. And this is baby's first dark romance. So I really wonder that as someone who's never read dark romance before, has little experience with the romance genre at all, I want to know your experience.
So this reminds me of a quote that Albert Einstein once said, "The theory of relativity is twisted in the head, and it doesn't matter as long as you're having fun."
Audience members need to know that Einstein is referenced heavily in this dark romance for some reason.
All of the books, actually, each chapter of each of the books have different, geniuses of their time that it focuses on. So the first book is Albert Einstein, and there's quotes from Einstein that head each chapter. And there's Confucius, there's Voltaire,
Shakespeare at one point, right?
Yeah, Shakespeare, because it has the hell is empty and all the devils are here. Yeah. So you get, and all of them are Lana Myers, our protagonist, favorite geniuses from her family. Her favorite was Voltaire, maybe. Her father was an Einstein man. Her mother loved Confucius, and her brother loved Shakespeare. Something like that. But beyond the, creativity on S.T. Abbey's part for starting each chapter off with quotes, what was, I want to know what you're feeling about dark romance.
So we talked about this before we recorded, that I feel like this is hard for me to discuss because I'm a guy who's reading a genre right now that is frankly just not targeted towards men. Men don't read dark romance, and it's not made for men. I didn't like it. To me, okay. I read the first book of the Mindfuck series. What's the name of the first book? The Risk. Thank you. I only read the first book. I found it to be not well written on a sheer quality of writing standpoint. There was a point where I was reading and I had the thought, I was like, have I seen a single simile or metaphor? And I was halfway through. While I was thinking that thought, I read a sentence that was along the lines of Lana being like, the thing that happened to us was so fucked up. It was like a metaphorical train crash. I lost it. The first metaphor I found was described as a metaphorical train crash. I was gone.
Okay, but like important note, and I do think that this is a bigger, like modern, popular book conversation than just dark romance, but I'm not reading Mindfuck for like a well-written, life-changing story. This is a soap opera. This is me the whole time being like, this is batshit crazy and being along for the ride. And I think that is, I mean, maybe that opens a conversation about rating systems and how reliable they are. If you get a 4.25 rated book and you expect something really well written and like quality, and then you get this, I could see that being a little disappointing. But I think it's just also most people I feel like are not going to dark romance for like a super well written piece of work. They're going for an interesting story.
It's implied that dark romance is dark. It's messed up. And I mean, the writing expectations from it. I mean, we've talked before about like, are we allowed to appreciate work that is not the greatest like expertise of writing? And I mean, I think we talk about like YA and children's literature, and are you allowed to not like children's literature because it is written more simply than adult literary fiction as it can be? Does simpler prose mean that it's invalid? This is definitely a step below that. I agree. The writing isn't phenomenal. And yet, you stick for the story. The pacing of these books is so insane. I don't care about the writing. We're getting from scene to scene to scene, and everything is happening so fast. And like, it's a fever dream from book 1 all the way to the end of book 5. And it's so insane, and the premise of it is so weird and like wild that you can't help but pay attention.
I think now is a good time for us to go over the premise because it is so weird that it needs bullet pointed.
The Mindfuck series. It follows Lana Myers, who is a serial killer. And she happens to bump into an FBI agent profiler who specifically profiles serial killers at a coffee shop one day. They fall in love. And
Because of course there's a meet.
Because of course there's a meet cute, okay? Serial killer meets FBI agent at a coffee shop. And they fall in love because they're both hot and single and like have weird schedules. You know, one's staying up late trying to solve murders. One's, 2 states away committing murders. So, they're honestly really quite similar.
They're keeping each other employed, really.
And that's the premise of it. Serial killer, revenge killer, has a list of people that she wants to kill who have done horrible things to her and her brother in a very twisted, culty town. And this is the FBI agent that's trying to catch this man down, except it's actually a woman, and she's actually like cute, I guess, and they fall in love because she's not crazy. No, she's trained her mind to not be crazy, actually. So she can feel love still, even though she does these horrible things to these horrible, horrible, horrible men that deserve these punishments. Yes.
I think that the story of Mindfuck, and I think honestly a lot of dark romance gets you on like the shock value of like either A, it is so batshit of a story premise being like a serial killer falls for an FBI agent who also falls for her even after he learns that she's a serial killer. Like he still commits to her. The end I will spoil for you because it was genuinely, I was cry laughing my way through it. She kills all of the guys that have wronged her. She fulfills that. Her and Logan fake their deaths and move to a Greek island. I don't remember if they ever named specific.
They Mamma Mia it?
They Mamma Mia'd it. But he ends up realizing and appreciating that like she just has an itch. Like she only needs to kill once or twice a year.
Oh, it's only once or twice.
It's an anniversary present.
That's how it ends?
He ends up, they move to Greece. He finds like one rapist or just really awful person and like captures them for her, and then they go out on their boat into international waters, and she gets to murder the guy, and that's their anniversary. Like that's his present to her every year on their anniversary. And then other than that, they have a completely normal life together.
If this was played as a comedy, it would be like top tier comedy. But the problem is, at least what I got from the first book, is that it's played very straight.
And I think that opens up at least the most intriguing part about the context of these books for me, and within the dark romance genre in general, is that yes, so much of it is shock value. Some of them stay with that. Some of them are just to shock you. After reading them, I didn't feel much of any other emotion. I read Verity by Colleen Hoover because my sister made me. That book was such a fucking train wreck. Would recommend for the laughs because it's genuinely insane. But walking away from that, I didn't feel like there was any real commentary made or point made or something I was supposed to take away from it. It's just weird. This book, I think, yes, it's corny, it's trite, it's cliche, but there is some sort of social commentary going on because, like Lily said, Lana is a serial killer, but she is only a revenge killer, and she's specifically targeting a group of men that hurt her and her brother when they were younger, that got away with it because of this weird culty town that they live in.
Except for the serial killer who offhandedly tries to attack her for other reasons. She kills him, right, and she kills one of the FBI agents that works with her boyfriends. She kills the hacker for the FBI's abusive stepfather. Those are the only two people that she kills outside of her list, at least in the beginning.
By the end of her story, she has kind of expanded to just any sexual abuser is on her list. But St. Abby, like, honestly kind of rounds her out outside of that. Like, she's a character who is also a serial killer. Like, that's not her identity somehow by the end of this. And so I think at least in that, there's some interest and connection to the conversation of, like, how do we punish sexual abusers? Like, what is a fitting crime? Personally, I'm all for it. But
you're going to hear no arguments here from the
she was completely in the right.
Row.
She was in the right.
Yeah, you're not going to hear any story stack arguments.
But no, I think that part of why this book works for me, is the pacing. It's so fast. It's always entertaining, even if it's kind of entertaining in a bad way. But by the end of it, I know what the author was trying to get me to think, or at least wanted me to know that she thought.
Yeah, it's interesting to think about, one, just a character who thinks that her life's purpose is revenge. She sees herself as like an angel of death. And then beyond that, she had no vision for a future. And seeing her realize that maybe there is a potential for a future is very interesting. And also this idea of like who decides when murder is right and wrong. This isn't like a new like St. Abby, the genius that she is, like discovers the idea that maybe murder is sometimes right and it's not just the law that decides that. Like she's not, this is not an original like thought, but it does play with this idea of like, if you were a serial killer, like how do you love someone like that? In what instance could you love a serial killer, and could they be justified?
Funny enough, if you actually wanted to do a deep dive into when is murder justified and what does that mean for society, you should read some Voltaire.
But ultimately, I want to bring this back to like, it is a dark romance. And that means that the things that go on in this book are dark. So, I mean, at this point in the podcast, I feel like the need to talk about, like, we're going to talk about the dark parts of dark romance. If you are the type of person that is uncomfortable with, like, dark romance as a whole, and it's going to, like, make you sick and you wouldn't even want to consume it, like, this is potentially not going to be the greatest discussion.
We'll see you next episode.
If
you're in that camp.
But if you're interested in the conversation around trigger warnings and dark romance, like this is something that I really have to think about. But to talk about trigger warnings, you have to talk about the dark stuff that is being warned about. So the Romance Genre Specialist is a website blog. They write about what dark romance is, and they have like a decent quote that I pulled from their website that is that interested me. And it's the subgenre gets its name from the content of the books within it, which often explore darker themes like abuse, captivity, and dubious consent. Dark romances don't pull punches either. Many put trauma and suffering on the page. This is a change from the way trauma used to be handled in romance, when it was part of a character's backstory and might have been hinted at or even mentioned in passing, but it wasn't really confronted. The nice thing about the Mindfuck series that I find is the perfect intro into dark romance is that the romance itself is not the dark part. Logan and Lana's relationship, love for each other, is kind of wholesome in such a weird twisted way. They genuinely are just two people who match each other's energies and are able to work through the issues that they have in their personal lives. Logan, maybe a workaholic, has weird schedules. So does Lana, but for obviously different reasons. They're able to work with each other and have decent communication most of the time. The dark part comes from the fact that Lana was gang raped with her brother, They were both gang raped together while they were 16 and 17 by kids 13 boys aged 15 to 19 or something like that. And this whole town basically covered this up. Her brother died from all the injuries, things dark things like castration and torture and terrible, the language used during these scenes is on the page. They do come in the form of flashbacks, but the flashbacks are throwing you into the scene. It's not just a mention of something that happened in the past. And they are usually paired with the scenes where Lana is torturing the individual man that is doing whatever terrible thing is happening. And she usually repeats quotes that these men said to her in that past, that night that her brother died. She is repeating the quotes back to these men as she tortures them. So, but the romance itself isn't the dark part.
So one note really quickly, just before we move on from that I think goes along with the idea of Mindfuck being a good introduction and that it's kind of an intro to dark romance, is that for as graphic as that was, you don't learn the real concrete details until the last book. You get small details as she's crossing off men from her list. You get kind of an idea of what was happening until it's one of those things where without it necessarily being told to you. And then you don't really get the full scene until the last book. For me, I struggle with any sort of assault in media. I quit watching Game of Thrones in season 1 because I thought Sansa might have been getting assaulted. This, I think, does it in such a careful and intentional way that I think is another angle that makes this a really accessible first dark romance read.
But it also, I agree, because it still gets to the darkness. It's different than what other romance have done where it's it's just a part of the backstory. It goes a step past that. So you're still experiencing it and it eases you into sort of the darkness where you kind of figure things out before she's willing to tell you. But when she does tell you, you're still there with her emotionally.
To give my input as again somebody, this is my first dark romance novel and my second romance novel, which puts me on a really weird footing, but hey, we're figuring it out. What I will say is that the romance aspect of it was kind of engaging, and I think that does have a lot to do with the dichotomy of how it's presented in that Lana and Logan, right? Mm-hmm. Yeah. Lana and Logan, as you said before, their romance is wholesome. It is genuinely a meet cute, and all of the dark stuff surrounds it. And, there's moments, at least in the first book, where it's Lana fostering this beautiful little meet cute romance, and then she's like, oh, but I definitely shouldn't have him go in that one room where I do all the torture and stuff or whatever.
Can't find my murder room.
The murder room.
That's peak comedy there, okay? Well, and we're laughing. We're laughing.
It's peak comedy, but it also enhances the romance a little bit because, what's more salacious than having a dark secret that you have to navigate around? And I'll give the book credit on that front that I was not only do I think the romance worked, I think the dark elements enhanced the romance.
there's this line, this interiority from Lana that I have highlighted because of its profoundness. And I think it really, describes their relationship. And he's definitely not a small guy, but he's also not freakishly endowed. Perfect.
Wow.
I mean, she knows what she wants.
Said no woman ever, I think, written on a romance page. I don't think that exists. Okay, the limit does not exist in romance novels, okay? And if the limit does exist, we don't want to be aware. There's also a line from Logan that I have highlighted. He's not saying this. It's like his, because it's dual POV, right? So you get in both of their heads. And when Logan is like talking about his desire for Lana, he says, or he thinks about, and I quote, the wayward appendage that has forgotten I'm closer to 30 than 18.
That line, I highlighted that line.
As if 30 is like decrepit.
I don't know how old this author was when she wrote this, but you could tell that at least that line she formulated when she was young. Like, that's so ridiculous.
I enjoyed this book in the same way that like I enjoy the Twilight movies. Like, I think you cannot take it seriously, but the second you stop taking it seriously, it becomes 1,000 times more enjoyable.
Apart from Mindfuck, there is another very famous, like more famous than the Mindfuck series, dark romance that I have read. Neither of y'all have read, but it is like, it's infamous for being like dark romance. And this is Haunting Adeline. And this is a romance that not only is dark just in like external plot, but is dark within the relationship between the two, like our love interests. And so because the Mindfuck series doesn't have a trigger warnings page, like of course people have written trigger warnings for the series, like third party essentially. The Haunting Adeline duology does, I think it's called the Cat and Mouse duology. Haunting Adeline's the first one. It has like audible.com has trigger warnings written on them. And I just wanted to read out what Haunting Adeline's trigger warnings were to give you an idea of what dark romance trigger warnings look like. Stalking and obsession. Sexual assault and non-consensual acts. Violence and murder. Human trafficking and child sacrifice, mental illness and trauma.
All right, I knew about all of them except the child sacrifice. What the fuck?
I actually don't remember that part of the duology,
Are
but
you,
I'm sure
are
it
you
existed.
telling me that you read these books and there was so much shit going on that the child sacrifice just kind of brushed past your memory?
It's been like 4 years since I've read these books, mind you.
As a fun note too, just because I didn't know going into this, the whole Haunting Adeline bit, I 100% thought the guy was a ghost. And it wasn't until you had us like doing like the prep for this that I realized he wasn't. Side note, has nothing to do with the conversation.
No,
it was
he's
just a
just a
revelation
stalker.
for me.
Wait,
He's just a
there's
stalker.
child sacrifice but no ghosts? What's going on?
No, because Zaid Meadows is the ghost. But he's not. He's just a stalker.
That's not a real
Who,
name. There is no one named Zaid. I don't believe it.
Well, you wouldn't know.
Damn.
Anyway, these books go so dark that like I tried to read the first book when I was 16, literally could not stomach it, like could not get through it. I was like, no, not for me, hard pass. But they are so like popular, and I, as someone that just is like a nerd and wants to know what people are talking about, I was like, when I was 18, I was like, I'm gonna push through and actually read the duology now. And good thing I waited, because girl, the first book wasn't even the bad one. I mean, the second book gets so much darker. Anyway,
Which one has the gun?
that's the first book. That's literally like chapter 3.
Do I wanna know?
Soon?
It's very early in the first book that the gun thing happens. I don't think it's chapter 3. I'm probably being dramatic, but
Ansley has just explained to me what happens with the gun.
if you know, you know. Dark romance for you. I think it was loaded too. Anyway, Moving on. So that was the list of trigger warnings for Haunting Adeline. So going into this, you're aware of these things, and you can potentially set the book down there and ignore it. Both Harvard and the Association for Psychological Science have studies on the lack of proof that trigger warnings play any significant role in trauma survivors' experiences, and some even react negatively to trigger warnings. But places like Ohio State University don't want to forget the marginal number of people that do benefit from them and take measures to implement them with care rather than disregard the idea of trigger warnings completely. At the core of it, I think that trigger warnings are a good thing. I think they're things that are only born with good intentions. They seek to protect trauma survivors by giving them a chance to put down material that will upset them and prepare survivors for certain themes and scenes in a piece of media they want to consume. It's meant to be empowering and promote inclusivity. What are your takes on the good of trigger warnings? Have you ever used them, noticed them, determined your reading experience based off of them?
I'll take this first because as a guy, I think my answer is pretty useless to the overall discussion. However, trigger warnings have never been particularly relevant to me. And again, that's my, that's being a guy in this world, and I recognize that. The only thing that trigger warnings have ever been relevant to me is I've looked at them and I've been like, oh, spoilers.
I think that that's a valid take too, because I think in my experience, they just create this sort of anticipatory nature to the reading. And so you're not getting to experience it in the way that you could have had you not known that things were going to happen. I guess I do see the argument that it provides survivors a chance to put the book down. I think in some situations, like Haunting Adeline, when you pick it up. And when you pick up a dark romance, you know that there's going to be dark stuff. I think that as long as we're not veering into censorship and policing what stories can be told, I'm not a dark romance reader. I have no interest in it. I read Mindfuck for You, and that was about it for me. I will never read Haunting Adeline. It's not my vibe. But I also don't watch certain horror movies that are too gory. I've never seen the Saw movies because those are not for me. But I also know that they have a huge following, and nobody looks at those people sideways for watching those movies. And so I think if we bring a different energy to dark romance, then that's not necessarily fair.
I once went on a date with a girl who was too into the Saw franchise. I looked at her sideways.
Into it how?
Oh, she was just a super fan. She could list the plots of all of the movies off the top of her head.
I think that it's really interesting that you mentioned this sort of anticipation when reading something after you've read trigger warnings. And I found a statistic by Sage Journals that actually talks about the negative expectancy effect of trigger warnings for trauma survivors. So it actually ironically increases the anxiety it's trying to prevent by saying that you are going to have this talked about. You do not know what capacity it's going to be discussed in. You don't know, basically, but you now are anticipating it the entire time, and that changes the reading experience completely, and not in a good way. There's also something to be said about that the Association of Psychological Science talks about, and it's the ways that trauma survivors read these passages with or without trigger warnings, but they didn't find a big difference in the way that the people were reading them, but they did find that by giving trigger warnings, there is actually an overemphasis on the importance that a specific trauma has over someone's life. By giving a trigger warning and saying this happens, it is now telling you that if you've had this happen to you or have experienced this, that now this is supposed to impact your reading of this material. It's supposed to impact your view of it, and not to say that we are always looking at things through a lens of our experience, but it is telling you that this is supposed to mean that it is not for you or is going to hurt you more. And now suddenly there's almost this weird thing where you're not able to heal because you're constantly being gate kept from more difficult conversations.
I think a method of dealing with sensitive topics like this and making sure that you are supportive, or I guess maybe not making sure you're supportive, but making sure you're not disparaging survivors in telling certain stories, are the way that a lot of documentaries do it if they deal with like assault or, you know, someone committing suicide, where at the end of it, there was that catfishing documentary that Netflix did last year where it was like the high school couple started getting text messages and it ended up being the girl's mom like harassing her daughter and her boyfriend. It was crazy. Definitely recommend it. But there were no sort of trigger warnings. Like, you knew from the trailer, from the little blurb, what you were getting into. At the end of it, they put up a screen where it was like hotline resources. If you or someone you know, they do that for TV episodes too a lot of the times. I think something like that is a perfect way. Is at the end, you don't create this sort of weird anticipatory element to it, but you still have an idea of what you're getting into, and then they still provide support. If this is something that you struggle with, if you need to talk to somebody, here are the numbers that you're free to call. That sort of thing, I think, does it perfectly. And I would rather see stuff like that in there maybe than like a full list of like, this is going to happen. Because when you think about the Mindfuck series, if you saw a trigger warning for gang rape, you would be stressed out about Lana and Logan the whole time.
I like what you said about like having sort of resources put at the end of a story, because the beautiful thing about writing and I mean, even like movies, television, like media that we consume in general, is that you learn through it. So potentially someone's reading this dark romance, they recognize something in the story within themselves, whether they don't realize that maybe something dark has happened to them, or someone that they know is going through like similar dark experiences. Now suddenly you have the resources to You had the book, which helped you recognize an issue that potentially you weren't recognizing before, and you now have the resource to do something about it at the end of it.
In regards to, well, first of all, I think I agree with that take. That is probably the best way to approach sensitive topics in media that people might be affected by. To go back to the idea of trigger warnings just genuinely being spoilers, while we were doing the prep for this episode, I kept thinking about how a trigger warning would fundamentally change. You know, let's just pick the easiest target here. How would a trigger warning change Lolita, right? If you were to grab Lolita and before the book even starts, if it says trigger warning, pedophilia, murder, how does that change your reading of that book?
To be fair, with the first like section of Lolita, like that first like intro poem, he says, "I'm a murderer and a pedophile."
Yep.
So you know, is a trigger warning necessary? You kind of,
You know what you're getting into.
You know what you're getting into from that little first poem. I don't know if it would. The thing is that does it even affect it at all? And that's the whole point. If anything, it just negatively affects it of like, oh, this is a pedophile murder story, when it's so much like deeper than that. I haven't read Lolita. I just read the beginning like chapter parts, like first couple parts or whatever, however it's like split up. But like the thing is that if you reduce the story to being just trigger warnings, you lose all of the subtext and all of the actual meaning things that make writing good.
No, definitely. And I definitely think with the Lolita example, like, okay, so the entire point of Lolita is the main character, Humbert, is basically trying to convince you, the reader, that even though you already know that he is a pedophile and a murderer, he tries to convince you to like him. And that is like that he's just that manipulative that he can do that. If you had a resource at the beginning that basically serves as an omniscient word of God, that is trigger warning, pedophile, murderer, it undercuts the aims of the book itself.
I also think something we talk, again, we are all writing students at SCAD. Something we hear a lot in classes, especially with certain types of writing like literary journalism and things like that, we're sort of told over and over again to write in a way that to let the details speak for themselves. You do not get up on your soapbox. You do not condemn your characters, even if you are writing about something really gross and awful of a human being to do. The quality of writing, something that makes it like a step above, is letting the details speak for themselves and like subliminally manipulating your audience that way. You don't have to tell them that this guy is awful. They can tell for themselves throughout the book. And so I think in some cases, setting it up, I mean, typically trigger warnings have a negative connotation. It's people condemning these things. It's the author separating themselves from the character's actions, even though they're the ones who wrote them and came up with them, you know? I think it's like what Gabriel was saying, like with it's almost like a word of God at the beginning of the book. Because it's a negative connotation, you're describing things because they're not socially acceptable. It adds another layer of like, okay, well, the author's telling me I'm not supposed to like this guy because he does bad things. And I think that just sort of removes the idea of letting the details speak for themselves.
I think by now it's kind of clear like where our like general stance on trigger warnings is. And I want to give my hot take, and I know that it's a hot take, and I'm allowed to feel things. But my hot take is that I think you should let anyone write absolutely anything, no matter how heinous. You get to choose whether you consume it. If you don't like something, put it down.
I would agree with that. I've definitely seen things that are so disturbing and disgusting to me. But once we get into any sort of policing, and that's not to say there are very clear, obvious moral exceptions to this rule. If it's something that is aimed at children, there is a definite line of what is appropriate to market to children. If it's about children, there's something very specific that you are allowed and not allowed to do. There are obvious exceptions to this statement.
And I agree. I have a note on here, literally in bold. This is not about children's literature, which should have regulations.
Right. I also think at some level in the more digital world, in a social media world, creators might not have a responsibility to tailor their content to a children audience, but they do need to be aware that children will have access to it. Doesn't mean that you have to change your content, but I literally saw genitals on social media last week. That shouldn't be allowed. Regardless of if I didn't want to see that. You know what I mean? Like, there are some gray areas, but for the most part, I agree with you because I think that getting into you can write about this or you can't write about this is just censorship, and then it becomes a where do you draw the line issue.
We can't, because ultimately these things that the reason we have trigger warnings is also because these are things that make people uncomfortable. It's uncomfortable to read a gang rape story. But if you are only dictating like what you can write because it's uncomfortable, and you're saying you can't write that because that's an uncomfortable topic, there's so much more to that feeling than just dark romance tropes. The world is uncomfortable. You can't ignore like the dark and twisted realities of like humanity, and then just like brush that aside. Like horrible things in the world have happened, and if the second you say you're not allowed to write about it, that makes us feel bad. The second we can't grow as people, the second we can't learn to empathize with like really like just experiences that we've never had before because they are uncomfortable and dark. How would we learn like about anything beyond like you cannot make that the basis for not letting something be written. And does it need a trigger warning if it's uncomfortable? You're telling people not to read the uncomfortable thing by putting a trigger warning out there. Obviously, like there's a different like subsection of like trauma survivors, which then means that if you are not a survivor of trauma, then trigger warnings are not for you. And if you are a survivor of trauma, there's evidence that it's negatively impacting you and not positively impacting you. I had a conversation with someone recently. Sorry, cut you off. I had a conversation with someone recently about like, are trigger warnings even helpful? And there's like, does it get too dark? Does certain material go beyond triggering and is just unnecessarily graphic, morbid, dark? Like where do we draw the line? Do things go too far? And like we're not allowed to put a how to make a bomb on the internet. And there's a reason we're not allowed to write about how to make a bomb on the internet. A detailed description on how to kill a significant political leader might also get taken off the internet because there are laws and things to like protect certain people. And there's this idea that yes, this information is potentially like anyone could figure it out, but by making it so easily accessible, you let like stupid people figure it out, and then stupid people suddenly think that they can go and do things that are like really dangerous and can hurt a lot of people.
Shout outs to Grok for telling you how to make a nuclear bomb.
And I really was conflicted about that, because in my saying anyone should be able to write anything, no matter how morbid, like if it has the potential to do mass harm, then, you know, how do we decide that? And, you know, is a recipe for a bomb any different than a detailed description of how someone rapes someone or is a pedophile, you know?
With that example, I think there's a slight difference in that one is like a tutorial type writing, and the other is like I don't think you would necessarily need a tutorial in order to commit heinous acts for certain things. There are some, I went through a phase in high school where I got really into horror movies, but I have a very weak stomach when it comes to gore. I much prefer like supernatural, paranormal type horror movies. And so I was watching TikTok videos that would break down the plot of some more graphic, gory movies because I was interested, but I didn't want to see it. It was things like Tusk, the movie where the guy gets like turned into the walrus. Have no interest in seeing that visually, but I was interested in the story. But one that I had found was a Serbian film.
Oh, that's not
yeah.
Good. That's a bad one.
Yeah. That was where I learned what like a snuff film is. Didn't know what that was before. It is genuinely just violence and gore for the sake of it, and it's disgusting, and really graphic stuff happens. But I also feel that way about other movies that do have, I mean, there's a lot of people that like that movie, but I feel the same way about the people that like the Saw movies and like the Final Destination movies. They make me sick to my stomach, but they don't do that for other people. And so I think really it's just it's a very nuanced conversation, because I think it depends on a case-by-case basis of what it is actually doing for people. For some people, it's just an adrenaline rush. They enjoy watching something that crazy. But I think in other cases, like you were saying, like if it's a how to build a bomb, there are people that want to harm other people. I think that ideas themselves are amoral. You can't judge them if they're good or bad because that's subjective. I think there are some I think are bad. But when you look at things like Lolita, you know, I agree. He's an awful person that does really awful things. But from a writing standpoint, it is a very interesting book as far as what it's doing with its devices. I think it just, if something stops at an idea, I don't think we can say if something is right or wrong, or it should or should not be written. I think the line is when it's inspiring harm to other people. If somebody reads Mindfuck and then decides to go and kill people, this might be something that we need to look at Mindfuck and how convincing it is at getting somebody to do these things. But as of right now, I don't think we can say this shouldn't have been written.
As Albert Einstein said, I love humanity, but I hate humans. That's an actual quote that I learned from the Mindfuck series. Thank you.
Sometimes I wonder if all the quotes are real and where she found them and how they like were actually pulled for this story.
Another note that I just wanted to say, as far as how do we draw the line? How do we do these things? Since we're all kind of on board with the idea that trigger warnings might not be the most effective, I feel like, because I'm bringing up a lot of movie examples of things, but movies have a rating system that doesn't spoil things, but it makes it clear to you what the contents of the movie are going to be. I don't feel like we have that with books. We have kind of a loose idea when we put them into genres, but even the lines between the genres are so blurred. And we talked about this, I want to say with the Percy Jackson episode, we were talking about what makes a YA book, and at what point is it no longer a YA book. I would not be against some sort of rating system for books in that way, of just, this is suited to audiences of this age group.
And I think that dark romance generally, I mean, is assumed like it is for adults, 18 plus, like heavy on the 18 plus. But I agree that a lot of these things have blurry lines, and what makes a dark romance different from a romance? And we've talked about that. We talked about this general idea that dark stuff happens on the page, but to what extent does it have to happen before you consider that on the page? There's no clear cut like answer, and literature is so like, it's so nuanced and there is so much gray area. I'm reading Red Rising right now, and that's like a perfect example of a book that could maybe be YA, but is also probably adult. And I mean, potentially later we'll have a conversation about that book, but
Potentially later, as if that's
no, we're
not
definitely having
another
a Red
episode we're
Rising
planning.
episode.
Oh no, is that a trigger warning spoiler?
This is a teaser. Any Red Rising fans that somehow had an interest in dark romance know that you've been rewarded.
The crossover potential between my dark romance Red Rising fans. I'm here
You
for
watched the Lit RPG episode. You're watching our dark romance episode now. Well, be prepared for Red Rising. I think that ultimately the risk of censorship is worse than the risk of harm coming from some of these dark like themes. If we start saying people can't write certain things, certain dark themes, then that I think is going to do more harm ultimately than if we just say write what you want to write, and we don't have clear laws and lines about it. If there is reason for us to believe that you are going to commit mass violence, acts of terrorism, or, you know, just general like mass murder or whatever, then obviously things need to be like shut down. But it's not worth it to say that no books about pedophilia need to be out there, because then you lose works like Lolita. And it's not worth it to say that no works about sexual assault can't be out there, because then you lose actually so many books, because that is such a dark reality of the world. You cannot ignore the fact that these stories do exist and there's a reason that they are written.
I think it's just important to keep in mind that subjectively, you can 1000% have an opinion on what book should have been written or not written. Objectively, you can't make that argument, I think. So like, yeah, I hate the Saw movies. I'm never going to watch them. I can't say that they shouldn't have been made.
And I generally don't like dark romance. I know I've talked about Haunting Adeline and the Mindfuck series. Those are probably the only dark romances I've ever read, and I don't seek it out.
I'm going to start seeking it out because it's time for Gabriel to release his dark romance pen name. I've got one book under my belt and I'm ready to corner the market.
Do you actually have a book?
No, he's
Is this
talking
a
about he's
bit?
read the
I've
Mindfuck
read
series.
one book. I read
Oh,
the Mindfuck.
gotcha.
I've secretly written an entire book.
Wait.
He's got a pen name and he's one book down in research. So
Watch out.
watch out, except he hasn't told us the pen name yet, and I don't think he ever will.
And I never will. I'm going to live a secret life where, unlike Lana, I won't be a mass murderer, but I'll be writing about mass murder because I'm so sick and twisted.
Right before we close, simply because our social media comments keep flaming us on the Harry Potter video that we did, I want to clarify again and make it incredibly, incredibly transparent. Everything about our conversation as far as what should be written, where should you draw the line, has the exception when it comes to children's literature or any media that is targeted towards children.
But come attack us in the comments anyway. And those that are critically listening, you can come defend us in the comments. We would love
It's
that.
engagement.
Yeah. Kids' books, leave them alone. Keep those pure. If you're on like a public social media page, keep in mind that kids might be able to see what you're doing.
And if you want to come talk to us about how terrible dark romance is and how much you hate it, you know, St. Abby said it best. I know this shit is fucked up, so don't bother writing to tell me I'm twisted in the head.